Good evening, everybody, and welcome to my channel, and welcome to the lovely Mitch Brisker. How's it going? Welcome.
Hey, good. Hi, everybody. Hi, Alex. Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for joining. And we should be simul streaming, so this should be on your channel as well as mine if we've done it right. So anyone watching on my channel, go and watch this stream from Mitch's channel. There should be a link in the description so that he gets the watch hours he needs to get money. You're not monetized yet, are you, Mitch? Not yet.
No, not yet.
Okay. All right. Let's get you some subscribers and some watch hours so we can get you monetized on because you're quite new to SPTV. So if you're watching this on my channel, go and watch it on the link on Mitch's channel. But yeah, thank you for joining. Welcome, Mitch. Do you want to give a bit of background about who you are and what you've done? I know there's been lots of videos you've spoken about your video work for Scientology and so on, but just for those of you who might be seeing you for the first time, very briefly.
Yeah, no problem. So I went to work for the Church of Scientology back in 1990, specifically for Golden Era Productions as a film director. Prior to that, I had been a Scientologist for a few decades, and I was a commercial director in LA, and I'd worked in LA for the church on a Dianetics campaign, which was highly successful. We sold 10 million books in a matter of a few years, which is how I came to the attention of upper management of David Miscavige. So that's pretty much it. And I went up there and I directed all of the technical training films. I helped to kind of launch the new era of Scientology as a more visually mature entity. Back in the 90s, it started to look really good. And that was kind of my mission. It's the reason that I went up there. And then I left eventually because it was total bullshit. And like anybody who works long enough for the church, eventually you're going to be humiliated and traumatized, and work that you did will be, the credit will be given to others, and you'll be blamed for things you didn't do. So it's just, that's the entire arc right there.
And you were in a bit of an interesting situation, because am I right in thinking you weren't officially a Sea Org member? So you hadn't signed your 1 billion year contract and living and working at Gold Base like the majority of Sea Org members. Like you had a sort of a different setup, right? As a kind of, was it a private contractor or how did it work?
Yeah, I mean, even though I was a Scientologist, I was hired as a professional. There were some, Hubbard had written really out of desperation when he was trying to get certain scripts done. He'd written what are called advices about hiring professionals, about looking for professionals, Scientologists or otherwise. First and foremost, it was for doing writing, because they couldn't figure out how to write films, but they also couldn't figure out how to make films. It was pretty tragic scene, or I wouldn't have agreed to go out there. But to answer your question, I was never in the Sea Org. I was never asked to join the Sea Org. I was kidded about it a little. And then I think I'm the only person in the history of Scientology who had a position where I was in charge of a bunch of Sea Org members who, you know, all had to call me sir and run around like I was their boss. And so it was pretty interesting.
And did you have to live according to Sea Org rules and, you know, Sea Org birthing and like the food and all of that, like as if you were a Sea Org member, or did you have were you able to go out and get your lunch from the local, you know, wherever?
No, I had a lot of freedom to come and go,
right.
Which was interesting, because after a while, you know, you become, at first people are hyper aware of you. You know, Jackson Moorhead, who was head of security when I went up there, I didn't know this. He told me not too long ago that he'd been responsible for my security clearances and for making sure that the crew really, like, you know, towed the line and didn't give me any trouble. So, but eventually when you're in a situation like that, you start to become a little bit invisible. Like people start to not notice that you're there, and the kind of mask comes off. So after a while, some of the behavior that I saw from people and the way they acted towards one another, you know, I became such a fixture that they would forget to sort of put on a different facade when I was around. So, but yeah, I had plenty of opportunity to leave. I lived in VIP housing. I lived in a cottage next to when Tom Cruise was going up to Gold doing his training and so forth. We lived in adjacent cottages, and, you know, somebody did my laundry. You know, it was like VIP status type thing. I was not, towards the end, I have to say, when things got really crazy with it inside that whole bubble, inside Gold, inside Scientology Media Productions, and they were kind of like became really intolerant, and they started treating the professionals, the ones that were Scientologists, like all of a sudden I had all sorts of duties and responsibilities of like a staff member, and the sort of ethics level that you were expected to maintain was made more and more severe. And eventually I was just like, it's just BS, because it wasn't like that lent itself to some positive outcome. It was like the more of that the more of that kind of pressure they put on people, the worse the work got. Because one of the reasons that I was hired is because I had the freedom to come and go, and I wasn't under sort of the threat of death all the time. So
I think that's so common among so many Scientology stories. When you start out, if you're a public, you're doing Scientology, you're reading books and doing courses, and when you first join staff, it's all very lovely and great and fine because you have
yeah,
these freedoms, and the deeper in you go and the further you immerse yourself in the organizational structure of Scientology and have responsibilities, the harsher it then becomes, and the ultimately more damaging and painful it can be for you. But I think the very early days, the very beginning of my days on staff were great. We're going out book selling, we were having fun. Like it was,
yeah.
it was quite, I imagine it was quite similar for you because you're like new to this thing and you're doing what you want to do rather than following orders from uplines.
Yeah, yes and no, but mostly yes. But I think, to speak to your question about how that's the way it goes, I think there's something very inherent within Scientology. I think that journey that people take from sort of joy to complete sorrow, it's because you can only sort of maintain a lie for so long before it kind of starts to poison your character. And I think that that's the thing, because it's not just at Gold, it's like everywhere. It's like when you give your life up for $50 a week and you give up all of your freedom and anything that would constitute a quality of life, it has an effect on you. I mean, that never happened to me. I mean, I was always paid and I had free, but it happened to people that I worked with, and eventually, the treatment of each other, and I was subjected to some very harsh treatment, which I was just like, but yeah, I mean, I actually had some really extreme red flags not long after I got there. But and I think you'll agree with this, Alex, that Scientologists were not monolithic. Some of us are progressive and we're pro-gay rights and da-da-da. And we kind of, and I know there's a lot of cognitive dissonance in that statement, but we kind of differentiate between Scientology, the idea, and Scientology, the activity and the behavior of it all. And for the longest time, I hoped things would change. And, they never do, and they never will. So
It's
one of the reasons you said,
compartmentalizing, isn't it? Like on the gay rights thing, I remember reading Dianetics when I first started in Scientology, and I had lots of friends that were gay and identified as bi and trans and so on. And it's like, I read this statement and I was like, I don't agree that homosexuality is a sexual perversion, and I questioned it, and it kind of, they were like, oh no, well, it's because of the times, and we don't practice that anymore, and you kind of go, okay, fine. And there's an explanation that's given, but you kind of you put your blinkers on and you think, okay, well, it's not a problem now because I haven't come into a situation where there's a gay person I'm introducing to Scientology and there's an issue. So I'm just going to carry on, and what's true for you is true, and it's not a problem. And when it does become a problem, then I'll cross that bridge when it comes to it. And that's the sort of the mindset you're in of like, okay, well, I'll just pretend this isn't happening, or try not to think about it at the moment and put it in a little box and move on.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. It's so weird. You're in UK, I'm in America, and it's a similar thought that, like, well, this book is written in 1950, and Hubbard was very sort of homespun, provincial, Midwestern. He had these like mid-century values, and we can evolve, and it just never happens. I mean, and the Sea Org members that I worked with, that I was close with, the ones that spoke about it were vehemently anti-gay and had endless explanations for why Hubbard was 100% correct, that these people are perverted and you have to They have to be dispensed with or isolated from society. So they were unabashedly true believers in that, which, which I can't tell you the number of conversations. I know the purpose of our talk today wasn't to talk about the church and their views on
Sure.
LGBTQ, but it's hey, we're there. But yeah, some of I have to tell you, one of the arguments that I used to have, one person who I worked with, the argument they would put up would be, it's that age-old argument. Well, if everybody did it, then nobody could procreate, and the race would cease to exist, right? It's this really stupid argument, and I would say, well,
That's exactly the same as what we were told in London. Was like, well, look at it scientifically. If everyone was gay, then there would be no procreation, and the human race would die, and therefore it's anti-survival. But that doesn't mean it's wrong. Right,
yeah,
that was the
but
excuse we were given,
yeah,
and you go,
exactly,
yeah, but not everyone
but
is gay, and not everyone is straight, and that's it's not
yeah,
about whether the human race can survive. It's about being true to
yeah,
yourself, right?
yeah. Plus science has solved the problem of gay people procreating, so that's not even an issue. But my side of the argument was, well, wait a minute, you're in the Sea Org, and the Sea Org doesn't allow children. So if everybody joined the Sea Org, the race would also cease to exist. So in terms of procreation, there's no difference being in the Sea Org or being gay. Now, is there? And
that's
that would
such a good point.
That would usually just end the conversation right there, because that put them in such an uncomfortable position. And then the other thing was, it's aberrated, which in Scientology, Hubbard has this definition of normal, which he calls anything that falls away from any variation from normal is considered aberrated. Aberrated means a deviation from a line, an expected line, but it's a very bad definition, because if it's a deviation that you don't expect. In reality, an aberration should be defined as, it's the variance that you don't expect. So for as long as there's been recorded history, amongst all of the animals and humankind, there has been some form of same-sex connection. So it's something that you expect in a global population. You would expect that. So how is it not normal? And I would try to explain this, but I never got anywhere. So I left.
Yeah,
and I'm not even, and I'm not gay. I just like.
Yeah, and congratulations, video. I think it's an I know we're not here to talk about LGBTQ plus rights, but it's like relevant to the last video that I did, and it's an interesting talking point. And what's I wanted to ask about your experience in the gold base, and you said you were you were running several Sea Org members, and you had a team of people working for you that were being paid $50 a week and so on. What was your exposure like to that side of the Sea Org life? Did they try and keep that hidden from you as a private professional contractor, or were you quite open to see the kind of RPF and the $50 a week and the living conditions and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I was kept very much in a bubble, very much in a silo, very much controlled information and so forth. But it's kind of weird, because there's a story an anecdote that I wrote about in my book, Scientology, The Big Lie, How I Made an Evil Cult Look Good, which hopefully will be out shortly. But a few weeks, I remember I was working on the technical training films, and these films, without getting into a whole lot of history, these films are considered to be core religious scriptures. How the word scripture got in there, I'm not sure, but it did. David Miscavige introduced that to the world of Scientology. But they're considered to be core to the technology of Scientology. There's 26 of these films that I directed that were written by Hubbard. And the technical aspect of it, the Scientology stuff, is very tightly scrutinized. But the creative stuff, I had lots of freedom with. But you have to, so the stuff that I was dealing with was of incredible importance. Hubbard had said back in '63 that Scientology wasn't going to expand or survive without visual training aids. So it was a pretty important thing. And so I think maybe it was the second of the tech films I was working on. And the e-meter, right, the device that Scientology uses for its counseling, a bunch of the films are about how to use that e-meter in different situations. And so we would often shoot close-ups of the needle, right, to show what a needle read was, because there's a specific significance that's assigned to these different motions on the needle. And we shot one, it was wrong, right? So there's a lot of checks and balances. We shoot something, somebody else checks it, the highest technical person in all of Scientology. And then they would tell you, no, that's wrong, and you'd reshoot it, and it's no big deal. Most of those are like shots cost like 10 cents, so it's no big deal. But one day I got called into Senior CS In's office, who at the time was a guy named John Eastman. And
just for those of you watching, Senior CO in, that's commanding officer of the international base, right? So that's, or international Scientology, someone really high up in charge.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I just glossed over that. Yeah,
it's okay.
Senior,
very high up executive.
Yeah, he would be the top technical executive over the technical execution of Scientology. I mean, all those people have been banished by David Miscavige in his power grab, so he controls everything now. But it was originally, there was a guy named Ray Midoff that people are very familiar with as the senior case supervisor international, but he'd become what was known as the inspector general for tech. And so this guy, John Eastman, took over. So I got called into John Eastman's office with the cameraman and the script supervisor. And there was another guy in there named Hansuli Stali, who's a really notorious, not anymore, but he was a notorious Miscavige like henchman and fixer. And they'd sick this guy on disaffected Scientologists, and he'd like bring people back in and security check them. And he was a pretty notorious guy, like especially if you were in LA. And he was like Swiss German, so he had like that accent, like an East German Stasi cop, right? It was just, the whole thing was really kind of scary in one way. So we get called in there, and they have me stand off to the side so that I can watch while the two of them just emotionally terrorize these two staff members on the crew for having produced an erroneous meter read. Now, keep in mind, their job, especially the senior CS case supervisor, his job would be to catch the error, point it out so we could redo it. That's nothing. I mean, it's just literally costs like $15 to redo that kind of a shot. But instead, they had to go through this kind of trial by fire. And these guys, they were so frightened because they didn't know if they were going to be sent to the Rehabilitation Project Force, which is like Scientology's, North Korean thought reform, camp. They had no idea, or they were going to be sent to grounds and just, not have a job in film anymore, but be trimming trees and mowing the lawn. They didn't know. And at one point, this henchman character he was in RTC. He's a sec checker. He looks over to me and he like gives me a wink, like, don't worry, you're not in trouble. We're just going to teach them a little lesson. And I was so disgusted by that. I was like, I couldn't believe it. And that they thought it would be okay. Like I would just go, oh yeah, I get it. This is how you treat the people. Okay, I can treat them that way too. But it was really freaky. And in one way, it made me a little more like Band of Brothers with the crew, because they were buffered a lot when I was there because we were getting work done. So it made it even harder to leave because I really cared about these guys. They're idealistic people, and their idealism was being used to exploit them. So anyway, I'm sorry for taking so long with that story.
No,
there were definitely things that I witnessed, some that I was asked, brought in to watch, whatever. I'd always thought there would be a change. My whole backstory in Scientology was pretty, it was, I got in, I was addicted to drugs, and I blah, blah, and I got off of drugs, and, lucky me. And then I, went back to college. I went to a good film school, and I had a good career, and I went up there to help make some changes. So, but yeah, it was, and the $50 a week thing, I actually spoke about that in a video while I was in Scientology, and I defended it because it doesn't reflect their standard of living. Because if all you had was $50, you'd be living on the streets, and they're not living in the streets.
Yeah, I saw this interview you did with Aaron Smith-Levin on Growing Up in
Yeah,
Scientology recently, and
yeah.
I was in the comments, but I was kind of I couldn't get my words out in a succinct way in the chat, but I think there is a real difference between cost of living and standard of living, right? If you think
Well,
about
no, it's standard of living, which is also
quality of life, right?
Yeah, and quality of life. They're
Yeah.
like so different, even though they overlap.
Yeah, because quality of life, you know, it all comes, it takes into account things like education and do you have a roof over your head and, you know, do you have food and all of these necessities that when you put that into context with like on the global scale, you know, you think about poverty in South America or Africa or somewhere like this where people are struggling to even just have a roof over their head and access to
Even
clean
in
drinking
America.
water. That's the kind of scale it's looked at on a global level. So yes, being a SEAL member at the Imp base is not a great experience, and there are many horrible things about it, but they do have those very basic necessities of a roof over their head and food and access to clean drinking water, and that's the scale that it's measured on. I think that wasn't clear to people in the chat when you were talking to Aaron Smith-Levin about it, because I think there's a bit of confusion about what you're saying.
They thought I was defending it. But they didn't really, and that's just on me for not doing a great job of explaining it. But it's and even at Gold, they have better food than most Sea Org bases and better berthing, and they're supposed to, because it was originally, you know, established by L. Ron Hubbard as his cine org, you know, base for making films. And in some cases, they have really good extended, like whatever you call it, educational. They brought some major professional people from Hollywood to train people and blah, blah, blah. But the standard of living is just like, I mean, the quality of life, you know, you're never going to have a family. You're never going to really own anything. You're never going to build any security for your future. You're never going to have meaningful connections. You can't trust anybody. They're going to rat you out. You know, you have a room called your berthing, but it's really just the place that you have permission to go sleep when you're given permission to sleep. So it's just, the whole quality of life is just abysmal. And I was trying to compare those two things. So, because when I hear the $50, I'm like, no, get off of that. That's not going to go anywhere, because it doesn't reflect their standard of living. Let's talk about their quality of life.
I think also it's the mindset you're in as a Scientologist, right? When I was a staff member, you know, and signed these contracts to say I'm okay with not being paid anything, and if I make money, then great, fantastic, but I'm not doing this for the money. I'm doing it because I want to help mankind, and I believe this is the best way to help people. That's the mindset people are in. So when you are told as a SEAL member, okay, you only get $50 a week, and you know, when you're signing up, you're signing a contract, but we'll take care of your accommodation, your food, and all of this. If something happens later down the line where you're not quite happy, or you think, I would actually quite like to maybe start saving up some finances and buy a house or something, you're just not even going to think about that, because what's important is saving the world, clearing the planet through Scientology. And if that means you have to take a little bit of, you know, discomfort or suffer a little bit in some way for the greater good of the greatest number of dynamics, you know, then it's worth it, and it's worth a bit of suffering, and it's a horrible place to be in. But that's why the importance is put so heavily on Gold and the video production and that sort of thing, because this is seen as one of the most important things, like book sales is, because you're disseminating, you're getting new people into Scientology, you're spreading the word, and Scientology it's seen as the only technology that is going to work and is going to help people on this planet. So if you're working on a film that's promoting that or educating people with the TRs or something, then like that's the most important thing, and it's considered a suppressive act to actually get in the way of a Gold shoot. There was a time when I was selling books at Tottenham Court Road, and there was a big the gold just showed up unannounced, and they were like, we want to film everything because you guys are doing really well in the birthday game. And for those of you who don't know what that means, it means that there's a competition between all the different orgs around the world of who can do best basically with their stats with delivering auditing, selling books, and so on. And they came to do a video to show the world at an international event how we're doing it in London, and like how we're booming at book sales, and how we're one of the best orgs in the world. And they came and showed up with all these lights and these cameras, and I was a bit pissed off because I was like, you could have given me a bit of notice, right? And all of these lights and cameras are off-putting, right? I'm going to find it harder to bring people into the building and sell them a book when there's all these cameras and lights everywhere. Like, you know, you're kind of getting in my way here, guys. And I remember the SEAL member who was the gold rep sat me down and basically gave me a very stern talking to, and said basically, Alex, you do not want to come across as getting in the way of a gold shoot, because that in itself is a suppressive act, and you need to get on board and support what we're doing and help us, because otherwise, like, you'll be declared an SP, basically.
Yeah, I mean, the level of punishment that gets assigned to things in Scientology is just so insane. But you know, we did. You were dealing with probably a remote video crew.
Yeah, they came up from St. Hill.
Yeah, they're like a remote video crew. But I mean, I have to say that what is referred to as the main unit, which was I was the film director for the main unit, and I essentially trained them, not their very, very, very basics, but in terms of creatively how to make films. And those guys were like in a situation, like if it would have been the main unit coming in, it would have been, they're like super professional. I mean, they have nothing better to do than to be super professional. You know, they definitely would have shown up. Somebody would have shown up 3 days before, and everybody would have been told, because that's how you have to do it when you're making a film. Like, you go hire a location, you need to go, it's just, there's laws, you know, you need to post road signs, and you need to tell people in the neighborhood, and you need to, you know, so they're kind of used to that. But I know exactly what you're talking about, because also the remote video crews, because they're shooting for events, and events are time sensitive. Like when all the people that are working on events, they're essentially jumped out of an airplane and the ground is rushing up at them, and they need to get their parachutes fashioned and deployed before they hit the ground. So, but yeah,
yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, like, it's
fine.
such a rush, and it's also such a lie, like it's a facade, because the purpose of the video they were creating was to show at this international event, to show, look how busy and booming London is, because they are doing so well with book sales and they're really busy. So they wanted to show that in a video to the rest of the world. But in reality, you know, on a good day, we might body route maybe like 15 people. That means we have 15 passing public walk into the org, and I introduce them and I get them to watch a video and sell them a book or whatever. Like, that's a good day. But that on video, right, 15 people walking into a church over the course of like 10 hours is not an exciting video. The building is empty most of the time. So it was like, we need to pack this building out with the most amount of people there ever has been. So we went to a local park down the road, and I remember running and saying to these guys that were just like working at local businesses, eating their lunch. And I said, hey guys, I'm making a film. Do you want to be an extra in the film? I just need you for like 10 minutes. And they're like, and got some people to come and basically sit down, pretend you're watching this video. And we just need to make the place look really busy. And that would be great. Thank you. And so that's how we got it. We asked people to be extras in this film. And I deliberately tried not to sell them the book, because I wanted to be true to my word. And I said, look, it's not a sales tactic. I'm not whatever, I'm just asking you to sit here to make the shot look busy. And then you see that clip in the event, and it's like, yeah, the building looks packed full of people, but that's not because that's what it's like all the time there. It's because I asked people sat in the park next door to come and sit in the shot to make it look busy. It's just a big lie.
Right. Yeah, there's actually you made me, I mean, this causes me to recall, there's Hubbard wrote what are called cine EDs. ED stands for executive directive. And usually they were written because somebody screwed something up really badly, like didn't know how to place a microphone. So the person was written to by Hubbard and was excoriated, and then, you know, told how to do this thing. And then somebody would take that and clean it up and turn it into like CineED, how to place a mic, and make it just put the the clean stuff in it. But there's one called simulated realism, which is a little bit of a twist on a movie idea that if you point a camera at something, you're not going to necessarily get the reality that you want to project. So you have to simulate the realism, but the realism, and that makes sense, right? Like simulated realism, I'm going to go shoot a Western. Well, you're going to have to simulate that realism. But with the kind of video you're talking about, which they would have read that and it would apply, this idea of simulated realism, they're trying to simulate a realism that doesn't exist, but just like a Western doesn't exist. But the fact is, you're doing that to fool people into thinking that you are valid and that you have members, which kind of brings us to the subject of what we initially promised we were going to talk about, which is how the Church of Scientology put so much time and so much effort into promoting and advertising to its own public, which is a very unique, singular activity that I don't think any organization does.
Yeah, I mean, that was a really good segue, because it is propaganda, right? What we're talking about with my example is a story of propaganda to its own people. We needed to make the org look busy for other members. And when we saw that video, we as staff members were like, wow, look how busy it is in Milano org.
Yeah, whoa.
We're rubbish because we're not as good as them. We need to make our org. So it motivates us in a kind of peer pressure kind of way. But it's propaganda to sell us.
Absolutely.
Scientology is thriving and expanding, because look at all of these other orgs that we're showing you in these videos. So it's preaching to the choir, right? Because they're already converted Scientologists, and it's just trying to reaffirm that. And talking about the adverts is a really good segue, because when I was in Scientology, they released the Super Bowl ad with the e-meter. And it was the first time the e-meter had been shown in an ad. And I remember it's this new e-meter, and it looked really space agey and cool. And I remember when they first played that in the Chapel of London org at this packed out event. I think it was tied in with the Golden Age Tech 2 events and Superpower and stuff. But there was an audible gasp. Like, everyone in that room was like, oh, like, that's so cool. Like, we're showing the e-meter in an advert. We are being so honest and open, and this is going to really change people's perspective of what Scientology is, because we're not lying. We're not hiding anything anymore. We're being really open and honest. This is what we're doing. This is who we are. This is going to change the planet. That's what the mindset was like, having seen that video.
Yeah, I remember when that happened. I mean, the idea is okay, so take the idea of a Super Bowl ad. Okay, those particular ads happened essentially because I think it might have had arose during as a result of the Debbie Cook failed lawsuit, that it came to light that the church was taking in a lot of donations for advertising campaigns and then not doing them. So then David Miscavige decided, well, let's do an ad and put it on the Super Bowl. So then that became the germ of this thing. It was a way of saying, it was a way of legitimizing fundraising, because it told its members, look, we've told you we raise this money to make TV ads, or we make TV ads. And Miscavige was also kind of sick and tired of all of the stuff like, oh, the Scientologists, they have a meter. So he was like, screw them, we'll just put it in an ad, which I thought, was actually the right thing to do. I mean, but then I think they should put OT3 stuff in the churches and I think they should be out front about everything, not just about the e-meter. I mean, I think when you walk into a classified org, like the London org, there should be a big sign that says, yes, Xenu is real. You can laugh at us, but you really do have body thetans, and if you don't get it handled, you're screwed. They would probably get a lot more members than they have now if they were just, because there's a lot of people that like that kind of.
I mean, they'd get a lot of people laughing at them, but people already do laugh at them for those.
Yeah, but if they did that, nobody laughed when they put the meter on. Nobody laughed when they put the meter on. They shut up about it.
That's what I mean. Like, it's making it worse that they don't just accept and acknowledge their the fact that these materials have been leaked and they exist and Xenu story is real, like if they just put their hands up and go and said, yes, that's what we believe in, yeah, they'd get a lot of laughter. But
Yeah.
then there's nothing to talk about anymore, like you say, because they're not pretending it doesn't exist.
Yeah,
It makes it
exactly.
worse for them.
Exactly. And there's enough of a fringe element that loves that kind of stuff that they'd sign up and they would probably have just tens of thousands of more members that they do. But then they have to stop abusing people because that's what's going to shut them down.
Yeah.
And that's going to be tough because that is baked right into their the very DNA of that philosophy. So yeah, so the that first Super Bowl ad, I supervised that. I didn't do it. I did the second one and a bunch of others. I think the last one I did was in 2017, I think, maybe 2016. Yeah, and nobody can understand them but Scientologists. I mean,
I used to think they were like amazing. Like it's one of the things that sold me on Scientology when I was a Scientologist. I remember watching these Super Bowl ads and thinking, wow, what they're doing at Gold is so slick and well produced and well thought about. And they're just these amazing videos with this great music. Like, for me, it was a sign of the importance and quality of work Scientology is doing.
Yeah. Well, no, you're right. I mean, the whole impetus behind us operating at that level of quality was that the work in it, like no matter what you thought of Scientology, that work, whether they're the kinds of films you see on the Scientology network or the ads and so forth, just in and of themselves, by their quality alone, they are intended to command respect. And it worked because, in I think the second one, Ad Age Online said it was the third best of the Super Bowl commercials. Really, they said that because it was a religion. They're like, yeah, we're going to give them props just for having the balls to be a quote unquote religion, putting it out on TV. But that never happened again. But even the people that spit up their beer at the sports bar and throw up a glass at the TV and scream, "What the hell is Scientology doing in my Super Bowl?" They'll say, "Well, yeah, it was a pretty slick ad." Like nobody ever insults the quality of it. But the writing, obviously I have a self-serving dog in the fight, but I mean the writing's just gotten worse and worse and worse. It's just total word salad. Like I thought the last one they did, just now we're really specific. The last one they did, it was the one Rise. And so basically it was just saying you're a piece of shit and you can do better. I mean, that was the message. But when Scientologists see that, they're like, yes, rise, we can go up the bridge, because they're always at a place where they need to ascend from. When you're in Scientology, that's where you live. You don't live at a place where, wow, you've arrived at some place where you have some satisfying amount of, spiritual awareness or something. It's always reaching for your next step. So that campaign really appealed to them very much. That I saw it and I was just insulted by it. I'm like, who the hell are you talking to? You're basically telling people that you're just like, living in a low state and you can rise.
It's like
terrible messaging.
Yeah, there's a real clear difference here. For those of you who don't know, I work in marketing, and that's what I do as a day job outside of YouTube since leaving Scientology. So I understand the whole concept of marketing and advertising and messaging. And Mitch and I have had a couple of really interesting discussions about this. And there's a real difference between external marketing and internal marketing, right? If you look at some of the earlier, I don't know if there were Super Bowl ads, but there was a infomercial called You that Scientology did, where it's you or you're not your name, you're not your job, you're not the clothes you wear, the neighborhood you live in, you are a spirit that will never die. And that was a really good piece that I remember watching and thinking, this is clearly aimed at inspiring others and saying, hey, you can do better, and kind of pushing that hope button, and that will bring people into Scientology. Right. Whereas the advert we were talking about with the e-meter, like, well, that's not geared towards getting new people in. No. That's geared towards getting the existing members to donate more money and delve deeper into Scientology.
Right.
very slight difference, but the money they're spending on these Super Bowl ads isn't going towards getting people in. It's going towards further indoctrinating their existing members. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And the proof of that is that they're organized around events. They happen around events. In other words, okay, just to back up, when I was working on the Dynamics campaign in the mid 80s, there were no international Scientology events. That's something Miscavige dreamed up. It was never part of Scientology or the organization. So that the Dynamics campaign was just a campaign. It was just lots of TV ads, more TV ads, very careful planning about media buying and about doing co-ops with bookstores and blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff. It was just a campaign. It was completely aimed at getting new people, converting them into Dianetics book buyers. And, you know, the book had published in 1950, and I went to work on it in like the mid 80s. By then it had sold 3 million copies, which is abysmal. And then 3 years later, it had sold 13 million. So we literally sold 10 million books in a few years. And then later, all of the campaigns after that whole operation in Los Angeles, the marketing operation, was dismantled and brought up to gold by David Miscavige. It never was able to replicate those sorts of things. And he turned all of the marketing into an internal facing way of convincing the existing membership that the church was doing so well, made them feel good, want to donate more money, take more courses, do more bridge, and so forth. And then they were always like, we stopped doing Dianetics ads for the sake of selling books, and we started doing them to have something to show at an event. Like it would always be the event's coming up in a month or 6 weeks. We need a campaign for Dianetics. And it's, you know, it would never even go on TV. So how is it a campaign for Dianetics? But they show it at the event, and they get standing ovations, and they'd make a lot of money at the events and subsequently. So,
yeah, I think it's just so interesting, you know, looking at how this money is being spent on advertising and marketing, but it's not doing any good. It's not promoting Scientology. It's propaganda. Like that's the key word here. It's not marketing and advertising, it's propaganda. If you look at a good advertising campaign, there's a thing called advertising called a rule of 6, right? You want someone to see your product or your brand 6 times. And once they've seen it 6 times, that's when they'll buy. So if you are walking down the street and you see a billboard that has your product on it, and then you jump on a bus and then you see the advert on the newspaper you're reading, and then you put out your phone and then you see the same product on social media, right? You want this person to get the message 6 times, essentially.
right.
That's a really broad way of describing a basic advertising marketing tool. But it's all about the campaign, right? Getting your message to reach the same audience in different ways at the same time. So any person who's had any marketing experience whatsoever would look at the way Scientology are doing things and go, okay, you're doing the Super Bowl ad, but what else are you doing? You also need to run a social campaign. You need to run newspaper ads and all of this in targeted areas at the same time, so that one person doesn't just see the ad on Super Bowl and then go, oh, okay, why is there Scientology on my TV? And then not think about it again. They don't work in these campaigns, which is not smart. They're not doing a good marketing job, but it's because they're not trying to get new people in. They're trying to convince and, you know, further indoctrinate their existing members.
Right. Yeah, right. Yeah, and from the inside, when you're on the inside of that bubble and you look at it, especially from my perspective, where I was completely in and completely brainwashed and was working on these campaigns and writing ads and making content for the network and blah, blah, blah. When you look out through that, it's this sort of very distorted reality that it appears to you like you're doing those things. It appears to you like you actually do have real messaging and advertising going out into the world, but you don't. And it's just, I don't know, it's designed that way, I guess. It's just like, I think it's the way that David Miscavige wants it to be. I know that he's very concerned about what donors think. I remember when we were getting ready to open Scientology Media Productions, he had a tantrum one day in front of a couple of us, and he kind of blurted out that he had donors. I have donors that are expecting me to get this place open. God damn it. And it was like, is that what we're doing? Like people gave you money and now they're bugging you about when the thing is going to open. It's very weird. It's a very strange way. I didn't do well. I kind of hit a real brick wall rather, when I went to work on their broadcast mission, because I thought it should be very outward facing. They took over KCT Studios, which had been a local television station. They still exist. They just moved. And KCT was very engaged in Los Angeles. They very much embraced LA. And I thought, well, when Scientology moves into that facility, even though they have a different purpose and a different mission, and they're not a local public station, they should still take responsibility for being in Los Angeles. And I had proposed lots of ideas about reaching out to human rights activists and artists, and who were, human rights activists, or concerned with the evolvement of culture and so forth, and kind of helping to host and promote some of these things. Like, if you can imagine doing programming, which is how Scientology sees the world, and none of it stuck. There was no traction, and ultimately I couldn't work there anymore, because what they ended up doing was not a program that said, look, here's how we see the world. It was, here's how we want the world to see us. We want the world to realize that we're the leaders in human rights education. We're the leaders in illiteracy, ending illiteracy. We're the leaders in morals teaching.
I think it's a clear distinction to make, though, because they're not. They would like to be, and they
that's my
wish
point. They
were.
want the world to see them that way.
Yeah, but
that's how they want to be seen.
That's a different message, right? If I was a marketing person and they hired me and said, hey, we want to be seen as the #1 human rights activism organization, I'd look at that and go, okay, great. We would construct a message that helps people identify them in accordance and in alignment with human rights, but not like lying about it. Right. I wouldn't do a campaign that says, hey, we're the #1 human rights activism because they don't have the stats to prove it. And where Scientology have fucked up, excuse my French, historically, is they do lie about their numbers, right? I think I sent you the article, right? I did a video very recently on this, that the Advertising Standards Authority here in the UK actually banned a Scientology ad for misleading the public, because they said, we've helped however many million people off drugs, and we've educated this many million people on their human rights. And the government looked at it and basically said, you can't prove that you have helped this number of people, and we haven't seen enough evidence that you have put checks in place to make sure you're not double counting people. And we're not sure if, when you say we gave out some booklets to a community, okay, well, are you counting how many booklets you've given out, or how many people are in the community that you could potentially reach? And they banned the advert, right? Because the advert said, we've helped this number of people, and they hadn't. What was it? I'm guessing you worked on that campaign, right? What was?
Oh yeah, I wrote
Our help is yours.
You're talking about the ones that end with the slogan, "Our help is yours."
Yes, our help is yours.
We called those the "How We Help" ads. Yeah, I worked on a few of those. I wrote a few of them. They're a lot of fun to write. And basically, in terms of the numbers, you would be handed. I would just, I, generally speaking, did not work on stuff for events. When you did, there's a lot of pressure and a lot of urgency to get them done very quickly. So you'd be handed a few things, like a research binder, which, as you know, working in marketing, that's pretty standard procedure. If you're going to embark on something, you want to have, all kinds of research. You want to have demographic research, blah, 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 blah. And that research would also contain numbers. And you just didn't look at it that closely, because you're just like, yeah, I need a big number. I need a bigger number. But the funny thing is they're always based on something. They're not just, even though as hyperbolic as they are, they're not just somebody pulling a number out of their ass. Like, I'll give you an example that I recall. So they would look at things like you mentioned, like the number of Way to Happiness events and how many books they handed out and blah, blah, blah. So, maybe they handed them out at the Super Bowl, and there was 100,000 people at the Super Bowl. So they potentially could have handed out 100,000 booklets, right? So then that would become the number. 100,000 people informed about, morals, right? There's a campaign called Youth for Human Rights, which is based on the United Nations, the Bill of Human Rights, whatever it's called,
the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Yeah, the United Nations. Yeah. Thank you, United Nations. Yeah, which was originally a project which Eleanor Roosevelt had done right after World War II. And so they picked this up and they've turned it into an educational component. And we did PSAs based on each of the things. And they aimed it, originally it was for kind of a broad campaign, and then it was aimed at kids, at youth. So it became Youth for Human Rights. And they had bought TV time on a cable network. I think it was Argentina. It was in a South American country. And they'd run some of these PSAs, these public service announcements about teaching people what their human rights were. And whatever number of households, however many number of subscribers that service had, however many households they were into, figuring that each household was an average of whatever 3 or 4 people, they would just take that number and say that our message got through to X number of people, or we gave X number of people our message. So there was always this thing that it would be based on, but obviously you can never prove that. Of course, I'm in America, and in America it's where you can't prove we didn't. So because
I think
we're a little different.
Yeah, I mean the restrictions and regulations here are a lot stricter than in the US anyway.
Yeah, thankfully,
right? And it's a good thing for us. But if you were to run an advert and say we are the best flavor chocolate or whatever, right? You wouldn't be able to do that, right? You would have to prove a survey or research or something where a certain number of people have said, yes, you're the best flavor of chocolate, right? There's no leeway in, even if you just go, we're really good, or we're the nation's favorite. Like, you always have to have stats to back it up. And this is where they I know that is the rule in the US, but I think it's a lot more relaxed on some of the claims that you can make and kind of crafting yourself around the regulations. We're a lot stricter here, and that's where they got themselves into trouble. I have an example actually of how Scientology get these stats, because when I was very early days in Scientology, I was at school. They have the Truth About Drugs campaign, and I remember wanting to they have these packs that you can go and take into schools that tell you the truth about drugs, and don't do drugs, kids. And it's like a little information pack with little booklets.
They called it an educator's kit.
Yes, an educator's kit. And the idea is that the Scientology will take these into schools and deliver like a seminar or a lecture to kids and educate them on the truth about drugs, so they don't take drugs anymore. And I remember as a kid, as a Scientologist, taking one of these kits into my school and saying, hey, can I, do, and they were like, yeah, absolutely, no problem. And Scientology were like, we don't have the manpower all the time or whatever. You're a Scientologist, you can deliver the seminar yourself. And I was like, yeah, okay, no problem. And my school were up for it, and did a lesson with like 10 students or something. And an hour, went through some of the booklets and gave them out, and that was that. But Scientology promoted that internally as we taught 1,000 students the truth about drugs, because yes, I only delivered the seminar to 10 people, but that school now has the tools, the resources, the booklets, and so on, that they have the ability to pass that information on to all of their students. And therefore the stat is 1,000, which is the total number of students in the school. So it's kind of not quite a lie, but it kind of is. And it's it's not hard proof, which is what you have to have in the UK.
Right.
But that's how they come up with their stats, as a real example of like how they inflate them with the best intentions. It's not like an outright lie,
Yeah, well, there's a famous quote from Lawrence of Arabia where Lawrence is asked by Claude Rains' character. He says, just to paraphrase, a man who lies hides the truth, but a man who tells a half-truth forgot where he put it. So there's a lot of half-truth. So, and in the half-truth, the real truth becomes 100% obfuscated. So it's pretty scary.
Do you remember?
Go ahead. No, go
I was
ahead.
going to say, do you remember what it was like? Because I think you said you were in the room or you're involved very heavily in that the Our Help Is Yours thing that got banned in the UK.
Yeah.
Were you aware that that had happened at the time?
Yeah. That it was banned? Absolutely.
Yeah. What was your experience? What happened? What was that
They're
like?
SPs. It's always the
What, the
same.
whole of the British public?
Yeah, they're just whoever that agency is that banned them. The British, they're just yeah.
The
It's
ASA.
always like there's always this thought-stopping reductionist answer. Nobody's going to go, oh well, we better take another look at our numbers. It's always like it's like I remember when I was working on Narcanon back in I don't know 2015, 14, 15, 16 when we redid the whole Narcanon program, and I was working in LA on that, and they'd had a lot of legal problems because there were like 4 deaths at Narcanon Arrowhead, and this girl had died of an overdose because she smuggled drugs in. So they were really kind of redoing the whole thing top to bottom to try to make sure that they weren't going to, they had some legal leeway because, I mean, listen, drug rehab is a dangerous business. A lot of people die at drug rehab. I did some research on it. The last time they gathered numbers in 2015, something like 13,000 people that year had died in drug rehab related deaths. So it's, everybody has a little bit of that, including Narcanon. But theirs was really negligent because this girl had smuggled drugs in, and he had a condom or something that opened up, and she died of an overdose, and she was left unattended. Blah blah blah. So they had an attorney working with us who was like the number one sort of medical guy, rehab guy. He'd worked with a lot of rehabs to help them figure out what their procedures should be so that they were not unsafe. Like don't let people leave because they might bring drugs back in, just stupid things like that. And they like to say, Narcan like to say that they had an 80% success rate, which is total bullshit. And this attorney, but it took an attorney, Alex, stating legal precedent to tell them you can't say that without an outcome-based study because it's in the medical field, and you legally can't say that unless you do that study and you can show those results.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is they'll push their luck. They'll try and do what it's better to
Absolutely.
ask for forgiveness than permission, right? Is Scientology's mentality when it comes to promoting their
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah. As long as you're the senior, if you're the junior, then look out. Yeah, you're never going to get out of jail for that one.
Yeah, it's true. Do you want to talk a little bit about, we touched on it earlier, the internal marketing versus external marketing. You mentioned when we spoke the other day that it was mandated that these propaganda videos that you used to produce were for internal use, for promoting Scientology to Scientologists. Do you want to talk a little bit about that experience and what Dave Miscavige said about
So
these campaigns?
it was implicitly mandated, not explicitly. So it was kind of encoded in coded language. So, as you probably know, being a marketer, that the field of internal marketing, that's a very robust, very legitimate field. Apple computers or Apple, whatever they are, the official name of the company, I forget. I think it's just called Apple.
Apple Inc.
Yeah, Apple Inc. They do these events. They do like the developers event. I mean, they shoot these things and they show them, on Apple TV. You can watch them, but they do specific marketing aimed at their customers. Their developers who are very important consumers of what they put out. And the same is true for many organizations. The church's most important consumers are obviously their internal public, but that's the only people that they market to. They do not do any external marketing. Obviously, Apple does a ton of external marketing. Maybe it's a bad analogy because Apple's not a religion. Wait, let me think about that. It might be, but okay, the Mormons, for example, they do both. They do internal marketing, they do training films, they do external marketing. I haven't seen any ads from them in a while, but boy, they did a series of ads back in the 80s, were done by one of the most famous commercial directors of all time, a guy named Rick Levine. And they were winning all kinds of awards, and they were doing these ads that they just pushed family values. There was nothing religious about them. And there were these beautiful little ads, and at the end it said, "This message brought to you by the Church of Latter-day Saints." And you were like, oh, it's the Mormons, right? And, there's been a little back and forth crosstalk between Mormons and Scientology. We ripped off an idea from the Army ads, which was like you meet a service person, and we turned that into meet a Scientologist. And then the Mormons took that and they turned it into meet a Mormon.
Meet a woman, yeah.
Yeah, and that stuff is all external marketing, but the church stopped doing that. It just doesn't market to even that kind of stuff, the meet a Scientologist, it was just to make Scientologists feel more comfortable and more normalized. I remember when Miscavige was first envisioning the broadcast facility, Scientology Media Productions, he talked a lot about how having his own media outlet, he could really change the narrative in terms of the press, what the kinds of angles that the press had on Scientology. I mean, he was discounting the fact that without an audience, you don't have anything. So putting up a broadcast facility is just, they were never able to capture, nor did they try to capture any audience outside of Scientology. But that specifically is aimed at marketing to their people. So, because that's all they do. That's it, 100%. Which is why those ads make no sense. Like the Super Bowl ads, when you watch one, you're like, yeah, it's slick. The filmmaking it's what I call artifice as opposed to art. In other words, the ads, they're decorative is what they are. They're highly decorative as opposed to really being works of art. But they're very slick and glossy on a decorative level. But you try to get some meaning, some message out of them, and you're like, what? Like it's impossible to decode. But to a Scientologist sitting at the New Year's event, watching the premiere of the next Super Bowl ad, you just, you were there. You just go nuts. You're like, oh my God, this is how they're representing us to the world.
Yeah.
This is amazing.
Because Scientology, because it's so important. I am seeing these chat questions, super chats, by the way. Thank you, everybody. We'll get to them very shortly. We'll do some Q&A in a bit. But I just wanted to talk about this, the importance of Scientology, because it's the only technology that is going to work. It's the only way that you are going to clear the planet and save humanity. It's therefore the most important thing on planet Earth. It's the most important thing in the universe, right? And so that's why they have things like the Preservation Project, right, where they're putting L. Ron Hubbard's teachings into steel plates in, titanium baskets and argon gas and nuclear bunkers and all of this. And it seems extreme, but it's because it's so important. They need to protect it in that way. And the same happens with the film work, right? The reason it's so, you need to get the best audio restoration technology, or the reason you need to spend $250,000 on, Mark Roberts, motion control machine, is because you need to have the best equipment, because it's the most important video you can ever make in your life, right?
Right. No, absolutely. The motion control machine was actually closer to 350, but whatever. I know, because I negotiated the deal with them. So
what was that like? Because Mark Roberts is a UK Scientologist. He lives down in Sussex.
near Sand Hill.
Company. Yes.
I'm trying to think of his name. He's really
Mark Roberts.
No, I know Mark Roberts. He was the inventor and founder of Milo, the Milo motion control company. But I can't think of the guy's name. He's a Scientologist who went to work. He's probably in his 40s. He went to work for Mark Roberts. And if people don't know, people that are watching, the Milo motion control system is really the gold standard of motion control. It's used on so many of your blockbuster, superhero movies and all kinds of crazy stuff. There was a young man, Scientologist, who went to work for Mark Roberts when he was about 15 and studied engineering, mentored with Mark Roberts. And today he runs the company. He owns a good chunk of the company. He's a really nice guy. I really enjoyed meeting him. And he's the one that I negotiate with. But
That's,
I mean,
this is just for those of you wondering, this is the website for Mark Roberts motion control. It's this kind of, I don't know if you can see it, it's like a robotic
it's a robotic camera.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a robotic camera that shoots amazing. Yeah, so yeah, Gold has, yeah, they're fully equipped with the world's most state-of-the-art motion control, which is they use a lot of.
The reason is because you need the best equipment to do the best work, right? Is that the kind of justification?
Well, it's like, well, it kind of goes back. I mean, you could blame me for it, because when I first got there, they were shooting. This is like a whole nother talk we could have. But when I first got there, they were shooting on these really crappy 16 millimeter cameras that used to belong to L. Ron Hubbard. There were two of them. They were like surplus World War II Aeroflex cameras, which means they were German. So surplus World War II means they were Nazi cameras. But it's the same stuff we used when I was in film school when we were shooting 16 millimeter. And they built some soundproofed boxes around them so that you could shoot sound with them. And they had just really crappy equipment. And I was like, it took 2 years that I convinced them to start shooting 35 because of the increase in quality, and started just innovating the technology. And then eventually I got so much work done, they spent $8 million and built that castle, which is a really nice studio. So we were always like, the thing is, it's like a use case scenario. If you get a piece of equipment and you don't use it because it doesn't work into your use case scenario, that's just criminal. I mean, even if a private person goes out and buys a $10,000 camera and maybe takes a couple of pictures at their, nephew's, bar mitzvah, that's just like, what the hell is that? But we would use the hell out of that stuff. And we, again, going back to the fact that we were intent on the quality of the work, commanding respect for Scientology. So naturally, we'd want to stay leading edge, stay state of the art. Two terms I hate, by the way. But yeah. So, and of course, at the end of the day, it's because you're being paid $50 to save the world. But if you're using, a $350,000 motion control system attached to a $300,000, digital cinema camera, it's like.
Do you use black magic? Were you black magic cameras?
Yeah, you're like, pissing through silk underwear. Yeah. I mean, farting through pissing on ice, as they used to say.
Yeah, it's but I think that's the thing is, the money to some when you watch a Scientology promo video like the one about Gold, and they talk about the state-of-the-art technology for audio restoration or film restoration, or how they're using these spending loads of money on creating a machine that can do this thing, so that we are the only ones that need that thing done, when it comes to restoration or preservation or whatever. Like, it sounds absurd, and you watch these videos as a non-Scientologist thinking there's no way they are the only studio in the world that has these 3 machines or whatever. But actually, it's probably true, because they do place such high value on using state-of-the-art stuff, because it's such important work that they're doing, right?
Yeah. No, it's actually true. It's actually, I mean, they oversell their studio. They describe it in terms beyond what it is, but it is really good. I mean, I remember when it was built, because I was intimately involved with conceptualizing what it was going to be, and every major studio in America that was new was gone to and investigated. Every place, Universal in Florida to the studios here, and every possible, and it was very advanced. I must say, though, and it's a story I can't go into great detail because it's not my story, but there was a young man who designed a lighting system, which they decided was too expensive, and for various different reasons, when they were building the castle, like, he designed, the Scientology version of, of the most amazing automated lighting system wherever. And they didn't like it. And as a result of that, they destroyed his life. And he hopped the fence one day with $500 and went back to his home country. And he eventually worked his way up as a lighting technician. And eventually his system was built and has been used on more blockbuster films than I can even count.
Wow.
So Sometimes they make some bad calls.
It's horrible that they did that to him, but hey, look,
Yeah,
if
no,
that
it really
hadn't have
is. It
happened,
really
if
is.
that
It
hadn't have
really is.
happened, he wouldn't have been as successful as he is
Yeah,
today. It's like how I talk about my story of, yeah, it sucked being kicked out when I got kicked out. I didn't want to
yeah.
leave Scientology, but if I hadn't have been kicked out, I'm pretty sure I'd still be in to this very day. So it's a blessing in disguise, really.
Yeah, I hear you. I think you've asked a bunch of questions I haven't answered, but I think I answered the one about what you asked about it being mandated. And it was just a thing that when you did an ad and it was being reviewed, the attention was always on how is it going to play at the event? Like it would be, no, that's not going to play well at the event. Like I used to do these 1 minute ads for CCHR that were these anti-psychiatry ads that they'd play at events and then they'd put them in the orgs to play them in their CCHR display stuff. And it was always like, oh yeah, that'll play at the event. It was never like, oh, this will be, this really makes the point. It'll inform the public. It was always like, how will it play at the event? So that's what I mean by implicitly, all the advertising is mandated for how it plays to an internal audience.
Yeah. There's one other question I want to ask you, but I'm actually looking at some of the Q&A here, and I think it ties in with one of those. So, is there anything you want to talk about before we jump into Q&A? Anything you want to cover before we answer some of these questions?
That I can. No, probably tomorrow morning in the shower I'll remember. So we should move.
It's always the way. We can always do a part two, of course. I mean, I've got loads of stuff on my list that we haven't, that we didn't cover just because there's, going on so many rabbit holes.
Well, the one thing I have to say, Alex, before we go into that is that, you were a bookstore officer, and I worked at the highest level, right? You were like a bookstore
director of public book sales. Yes.
Yeah.
Bookstore officer was one of the posts below me in my.
Oh, well, that's right. That's right. I always get that. I always got confused about that. Yeah. You were overall book sales.
Yeah.
You might have had multiple book sale officer.
But London and Malta were my territories. Yeah.
Yeah, you were there on that local level doing that thing, a very important activity, because it used to be that books were how you got people into Scientology. That's completely changed. Nobody even talks about that anymore. They just talk about the basics or whatever they want to call it so they can market it internally. And then I was doing what I was doing, at the opposite end of the spectrum. And yet so much of the kind of lying bullshit we both sort of were dealing with in our own way. And that's why talking with you has just amazed me on that level. Yeah, okay, we should move on.
But just very quickly on that, what you were saying earlier about gold being so important, and then these references saying L. Ron Hubbard said that films are the only way we're going to disseminate and get the message out there. The same policies exist for book sales, right? There are policies that says book selling is the #1 most important thing any org can do, and that's the only way you're going to expand Scientology. I don't know whether it's just a Div 6 promo thing when it comes to films and books or whatever, but there are always policies that indicate what you were doing and what I were doing were considered in Scientology the most important, vital things you can do. Right?
Yeah. Remember, books make booms.
Books make booms, exactly. Yeah. And I would always fall back onto that policy. If there were any ever obstructions or bumps in the road, if I wanted to go and do something and I got some pushback, I'd always say, well, you can't get in my way because I'm selling books, and that's the most important thing. It was kind of like a catch-all policy I could rely on to kind of give me a free pass to kind of do whatever I needed to do, or get some money to go and hire a market stall or whatever to go and sell books. You can't really argue with L. Ron Hubbard's policy. When L. Ron Hubbard's policy says this is the most important thing, you kind of get a lot of slack and a lot of attention. So
absolutely.
All right, let's look at these questions. Denver Stevo, thank you so much for the super chat. Denver Stevo is awesome, by the way. I don't know if you've seen any of his videos, Mitch, but
he's more than awesome. He's really ubiquitous.
Cool. He actually last night was doing a live stream, and he called Flag for me to see if he could get a hold of an old friend of mine who's kind of disconnected from me. I was told that she didn't work at Flag anymore, and that she's doing something else now, but Denver Stevo called up and actually managed to get her on the phone and verified that she's okay. She's still working at Flag. She's not on the RPF, and it was just really nice of him to do that and kind of help me out. So yeah, just wanted to say thanks to Denver Stevo while his comments on. But he said, Mitch, your insights on directing and producing in Scientology fascinate me. Alex, you are a great interviewer. Thank you both. Let's all do dinner and drinks next time we're all in London together. Oster smells like poo. I'm down for that. 100%. I'll grab a beer with you anytime.
Especially if he's buying. Denver Stevo, you buying? Okay, good.
It's Denver Stevo's round for sure.
Yeah.
Daniel Penny.
We'll buy you around.
Thank goodness all of us in the UK are SP validation at last. I think that was in reference to the ASA banning thing.
Right.
Stephanie Estabrook, appreciate you both. Thank you for the super chat. We appreciate you too. This actually is the question that I wanted that was kind of relevant to what I was going to ask. Freezy New Project. Mitch, aside from you, did Scientology have anyone left who has a good concept of directing? Also, did Dave shoot down good ideas because he didn't understand what you were doing?
I'm slightly confused. Aside from you,
did Scientology have anyone left who had a good concept of directing? So after you left, was anyone else in Scientology good at directing?
Yeah. Sorry to disappoint you, but yeah, there was a guy that I spent 7 years apprenticing, and he's actually quite good at that genre. He's done the last few Super Bowl ads, so he's now the director up there. So I was, amongst many other things that I did, I was responsible for training the first successful Sea Org film director in the history of Scientology. So
that's amazing. I think what that reminded me of was the dichotomy between what you were actually doing at Gold and what we were told in London Org was going on at Gold. Because I think I mentioned this to you in a chat once that you were doing a video with someone else. At London, we were told that the videos that Gold produce, all of them, Super Bowl ads and everything, were all written by L. Ron Hubbard. And all you guys do at Gold is like you open up this wonderful book, and this is how great L. Ron Hubbard is that he wrote like specific camera angles, like you need to shoot this, and this is the scene, and this is what the message is. And Gold kind of work with L. Ron Hubbard's technology and specific written word to make these videos exactly how L. Ron Hubbard wanted them. And I know that's true for some of them, like the TRs and so on, TR videos. But he didn't write everything. Like you were writing these commercials, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, he didn't write. He never wrote an ad. I think early on he wrote some. He wrote a classified ad for newspapers for Dianetics. But that was pretty much it. And then he wrote some other advices about it, but he never wrote any of that stuff. And pretty much in all of the tech films I did, I went over this with somebody, I don't remember who, but because the crew that he was working with was so green that knew nothing about making films. I mean, I'd heard them described as cooks and bottle washers and groundskeepers. And they were basically, a conglomeration of messengers. You had 16-year-old David Miscavige on camera. You had, Norman Starkey, who'd been a captain on the ship. You had all these people, they do nothing. I mean, they were just all thumbs and club-footed. So he created this script format that broke scripts down into 16 columns. It's not how it's standardly done. And he basically mandated like every shot, every cut, every angle, and it made no sense. I mean, if I had followed any of that, I followed the description of the shots and what the characters said. And then I made the film as I wanted to make it. But if I followed the stuff he wrote, indecipherable, it would have been a total mess. The film Orientation, that film that everybody has to see in order to. So that film, the script for that, I mean, it was. I had.
Are we talking about the original one or the remake? Because in the original one,
I did all of them.
Well, they're going to blow your brains out, and you could jump off a cliff.
But that one, right? Yeah. But I did all of them. And I also suggested we take those lines out because I thought they were really bad marketing. But the camera angles that were described for shooting the commentator, eventually we got rid of an on-camera commentator, and we just went with a voiceover in case the guy went SP. We wouldn't have to reshoot it. You could just redo the voice. But all of those camera angles, they were indecipherable. I had to actually shoot some tests where I actually shot it the way it was scripted so that I could show Miscavige that it would never work. It was just, there was like every third shot would zoom like this into the guy's eyes. Like crazy stuff. Like,
Jeez.
He must have been drunk when he wrote it. So
or high or something. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah. Did you mentioned there the whole idea of getting rid of like pieces to camera in case the person went SP and it was just a voiceover. During your time at Gold, did that fear of people speaking out and leaving the Sea Org, how did that affect your video making and your filmmaking? Did it have an impact on how you filmed stuff and what you could film so that you could easily go back and edit stuff out?
Yeah, I mean, for a while, I described my job. Well, I described my job a lot of different ways. I had a lot of fun with my job description. For a while, I described my job as I was the director of SP removal. So yeah, it definitely had an effect. I mean, it led to some change in practices, like after Larry Anderson left, because he was in a few films, Orientation, he was also in a very important technical training film, and some other things. So then it was mandated, well, we're just going to hire actors who are not Scientologists. So then that happened. Although they still continued to hire some. I know when we reshot, any ex-Scientologists watching will appreciate this. When we reshot the Professional Tiaras Chorus, there's two leads in that film that are OTA, and I could easily see them leaving at some point. So, but for the most part, they stopped.
But you know what they don't do? Like when it comes to orgs, when you go on the Scientology website and you look up Scientology London and they show you a video tour, they don't hire actors for that, because I'm pretty sure I'm in a couple of those videos, right? There are tours of the org, and they go, hey, look how busy we are, and this is what the information center looks like, this is our course room. The people who are in those videos are mostly staff members. I was there when they filmed them, because they were like, hey, take off your staff uniform, put it on a t-shirt, put it on your civvies to make it look busy, and like it looks like there's hundreds of people in the reception. It's all staff members pretending.
Yeah, but you guys, and they still do that at Gold. I mean, they use staff with SAG actors. They got permission from Screen Actors still to actually do that. But you guys are just being atmosphere. You're just like extras.
Yeah,
like you're not like talking to the camera. You're not saying,
That's the thing when you're talking about like pieces to camera and the TR.
Yeah, you're not associated,
right?
Like nobody's, you're just like in the background. So you're just a body moving around. I'm sure you'll be in those films forever. It's just not really worth making. So
how long do you reckon it will be before they remove you from that Gold video that you dissected on your channel recently?
Oh yeah, you saw my reaction video?
Yeah.
I don't know. They're pretty busy. I mean, one of the reasons that I did it is because I think I can legally do that because under fair use. Although I didn't ask an attorney, so
you could do a reaction video to something. You can provide commentary, like
That's what fair use. I mean, I've read the fair use laws, and and that seems to fall under it. So I did that. I don't know. It's still on there.
I'm surprised it's still there. When you first showed up on SPTV and started speaking to Aaron on growing up in Scientology, I thought within days they would just take that video down and then maybe a couple of weeks later re-upload it with you stitched out. I'm surprised they haven't even taken it down yet.
I know. It's like crazy. Did you look today? Is it still on?
It was there this morning when I last checked.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I know.
Yeah, I think it's just problematic for them. I mean, maybe, I don't know.
Who knows?
I don't know. I don't have an answer. I mean, I'm working on one, when the stuff I did against Ron Miscavige, right? Like when you Google my name, I think that's the first thing that comes up. So when he released his book, in 2016, in April 2016. His book, Ruthless, Scientology, Me and My Son, David Miscavige, my son, David, and me. The 2020 producers asked the church, meeting Miscavige, if they cared to respond. And so the response was, we all went up to Gold. I wasn't there at the time. And a bunch of us did videos. And then I shot a bunch of stuff, blah, blah, blah. And then they had their Italian baker who made the cake for, Tom and Katie's wedding, make a beautiful basket of bread, because, once the 2020 producers tasted how good the bread was at Gold, then of course Ron Miscavige must be lying about how the staff were treated, right? So, and then later, without my knowing it, screw me, I just should have known better, I guess. But they then took all of that material. They took my interview, which was really the longest interview of anybody's, and they put it on a hate website. And I didn't know about that until somebody pointed it out, because I never did a hate website. I never spoke on camera. I never spoke out against somebody. Although I would have done one against Marty Rathbun and still would today. Okay, so
yeah,
but I think he's universally hated.
I don't think there's many people that are fans of Marty Rathbun these days on either side.
Nobody likes him, but those interviews are on the Ron Miscavige hate site, and so I'm currently doing a reaction video to that.
Exciting! I can't wait to see. That would be great.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty funny.
We should talk about your book as well. But before we do, let's just get through a couple more questions. Tassie Devil, Mitch has a fascinating insight into Golden Era Productions. Hope he does a heap of explanations. Also responds to 60 Minutes Australia story this weekend, Valerie Haney especially. I don't know if you're aware of this, but 60 Minutes Australia.
Yeah, I saw the promo.
Yes, you saw it. Okay, this Sunday. Do you think you'll do a reaction to that? What are your thoughts at this point?
I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine they left anything out. I mean, from the promo, it's pretty thorough. Yeah, I know Valerie very well. I've seen her since she left, since I left. I worked with her when she was first busted out of RTC. She worked in the sets department and Gold, I think, as a painter, which is one of Miscavige's favorite things to do, is just throw his broken and abused people into the film department, usually in the sets. And I saw the little clip she did. I think it's not going to need a reaction video. So, I mean, I think it in and of itself is a reaction video. It's a reaction to what's going on with Scientology.
Absolutely.
But if I thought I could actually do something other than make some clickbait, I would definitely do it.
I think what Careful JCYT said here, I like the various experiences. It helps make it more understanding. Like, that's so true. I think that having a conversation with you and hearing your experience from Gold is so different to so many others' experiences. And the more of us are speaking out, the better.
Yeah.
And I've really enjoyed talking to you on this stream and off stream about, like, hey, this is a project that you worked on and this is how it was received in London, the other side of the world. And like how the stories about how it was made were like shifted and changed. And kind of by the time it reached us in London, the rumors were completely different to reality. It's just been really interesting to hear what went on at Gold, because there's not enough people speaking about it, and especially so recently that we're there.
Yeah, and I was there a couple of years ago, so it's like.
Another one for Tassie Devil, Mitch. You have thought this through for a long time. Glad you are out. Your willingness to articulate the process is so valuable. SPTV is changing everything. Greetings from Australia.
Thanks, mate.
I think I brought this up because it kind of ties into your book. Do you want to plug your book that you're working on at the moment? I'm really excited to read it. When's it coming out?
It's actually finished. I'm waiting for some editor notes, and I'm kind of going through it to just make sure that it's as completed as it can be for now. I mean, it can never be complete. I'm sure there'll have to be a new version in some point in the future, but it's a very personal story, because I think, as you might be able to glean from what I've said so far today and on other channels, I don't have a lot of, well, I certainly had a lot of interaction with celebrities in Scientology, but I don't have stories of, John Travolta kissing his masseuse and stuff like that. It's not what my book is about. It's more about the ideas and the way people get trapped into it, and what my experience was having that role and living with the Sea Org. And it starts a few years before I got into Scientology, which I think is a very interesting story that people have prompted me to write for a long time. So I think it's just a different story. And one of the one of the primary things I did for the church in life and before working for Scientology was write. So it wasn't like a new thing. I'd never written a book before, but boy, I've done an awful lot of writing. So I think it's one of the reasons. I mean, I wrote 300,000 words in just a few months. So it was.
Wow. Once you start, you kind of can't stop, right? I mean, marketing is real writing. I'm a big writer as well. And I think once I'm in the headspace and I sit down, and I think I'm just going to write 500 words.
Yeah.
I'll look up and realize I'm suddenly 6 hours later and how many pages in.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. I went to do this reaction video to the Ron Miscavige stuff. And I looked at the videos again, and I was really disgusted by them. And what I said, and I was just like, okay, I'm going to roll through this, and I'm like, I better make some notes. I wrote 15 pages of notes. It was just like crazy.
I'm like that every time I speak to someone, even from our chat beforehand. I'm like making notes of questions I could ask, and then the next time when I speak to you and I want to ask you these questions, I just get more questions to ask you. And I've got like a massive note of it's the same with like videos I want to do on YouTube. I'm like, oh, I could cover this topic, I could cover this topic, and every time I look at that list and think, okay, I'm going to make this one, I come up with 10 more ideas. It's just getting longer and longer.
Well, and from what I've seen, they're all good ideas. I mean, you've made some really terrific content.
Thank you. And I can't wait to see what you put out as well. I mean, we've all seen the quality of your work in the Scientology videos. So, I'm really excited to see how that translates into your personal story and how you're sharing the things you want to share, right?
It's really tough when you don't have 30 Sea Org members that you can order around. So.
And wait, are you saying you don't have one of those MRMC Milo machines at home, the $300,000?
I don't. No? I tried to get a.
Who even are you, Mitch?
I tried to get a buy one, get one free deal, but
they weren't going for it.
Yeah, they weren't going for it. So.
Linda P. Golan here. Will the book be on Audible?
Yes. As soon as it gets published, I'm self-publishing. I was round and around with a few publishers, and it's just like they're a real pain in the ass to deal with. And fortunately, I discovered that much as what has happened in the music industry has happened in the publishing industry. Like artists don't need record labels anymore. So fortunately, the same is true in publishing. So once the book is out, book, paper book, ebook, then I'm immediately going to start on the ebook, the Audible book, or whatever you call it.
Yeah. Do you have a date yet? Do we know when it's going to be published?
I don't, which is why you need to subscribe to my channel and you need to hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when it comes out. I'm hoping, by the end of the summer latest. If not
absolutely
sooner.
How many subscribers have you got at the moment on YouTube?
3, I think. My dog, my kids. No, I don't
me.
Know. Yeah, and you. Not enough. I don't know.
Okay.
1,500, something like that.
Well, hopefully we can get you the watch hours and subs that you need. I've just posted the link in the live chat.
That.
If you're watching this, go and subscribe to Mitch's channel. It's Scientology: The Big Lie. You can find it in the link of the link in the description of the video.
Yeah, and I just want to say that if people want to start contacting me at Scientology@thebiglie@gmail.com, all one word, or leaving messages on any of the videos about things questions they have and so forth. I'm thinking that I might do like an Ask Me Anything thing where to just engage with the public, because I know a lot of people are really curious about what goes on up there.
That would be great. And hopefully we can do another video together soon. I think my knowledge and expertise in marketing and working in the sales division in Scientology and you doing all the videos, like there's so many conversations we can have about so much. So I can't wait to have you back on. And thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Let's do this again soon for sure.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So guys, go and follow Mitch if you haven't already. Go and give him a little subscribe. And if you want to get in touch with either of us, leave a comment in the description and we can get back to you. And if you want to support Goldie, that's another thing I wanted to mention actually. Someone brought this up. By the way, Alex, I love my Goldie TV mug and I love it. In my merch store, apostatealex.com, there's a Goldie merch section, which is all stuff that supports her as a moderator. So if you want to buy a mug or a t-shirt or something that's from the Goldie collection, all of the profit goes straight to her, because I'm not earning enough money to pay Goldie for her help in this community. So that's a way of us showing support to her. So
yeah,
if you want
and
to support Goldie, that's how.
Goldie is a force of nature. It's
She's amazing. There's a question whether she's real or whether she's an AI bot, but I can confirm she is real. I have been on FaceTime with her. She is a real human being, and she's
Oh
lovely.
wow. Okay, great. Well, she could be a deep fake AI bot.
Who knows? It's all possible.
In this day and age, absolutely.
Exactly. But anyway, thank you so much, guys, and we will catch you on the next one very soon.
Yes, thanks.